really hard to like quantify and qualify like the significance of a good brand, but we all know it when we see it. Like maybe in clients that you're working with, like how much are they able to, like if they have an established brand, if they're building content, if they're doing all the right things to win hearts and minds, how much are they able to lean into that in order to kind of pull different levers on the price and packaging of their product?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say off the bat, I'm not a branding expert. So you might talk to a branding expert who gives you a different answer. I'll give you my perspective. So I mostly deal with B2B SaaS companies. And there's two relevant marketing concepts that I think fall into your domain of your question. So one is brand, and then the other is positioning. Mm. It's been my experience that both are relevant for B2B and B2C, but their relative importance differs between the two. So in consumer, brand is all powerful. So you think about brands like Coca-Cola or Southwest Airlines or Hilton Hotels, right? The brand is incredibly powerful. Whereas when you get to B2B, it tends to be more your positioning. And your positioning is helping customers frame the context that helps them understand your differentiated value. And so in B2B, B2B pricing specifically, I really help customers mostly focusing on their price positioning and their overall positioning. So when we think about positioning in the concept of pricing, we use a tool called a price value map. So at any point, a customer is always making a trade-off of value versus price. And you can imagine a landscape, if you will. If I have a two axes, unfortunately, it's not a visual medium. So I'll try to make it as easy to follow for your audience as possible. But if I map out on two axes, one is perceived value, the other is perceived price, I might have multiple players in the market occupying different components of that map. So I'll have like a low cost player, an average or a market player, maybe a premium player, and then a luxury player. So if I take the automobile market, for example, your Toyota Corolla might be your low cost, no frills entry point. Then you have your Toyota Camry, sort of your average market player. When I get into premium, you're talking about your BMW, Mercedes, Tesla, Model S. Then I get into my luxury, your Bugattis, your Ferraris, your Lamborghinis, right? And so understanding where you fall on that price to value trade-off tends to be much more important. There is a brand component, but it tends to be a little bit more muted in the B2B space.
I love it. One thing I want to talk about, because I feel like so much, and especially in B2B specifically, when people are doing these podcasts on these topics, they talk about them all in like generalities, knowing that on the other side of this, there are people who work in companies of all different shapes and sizes. So I'm curious to know from you how how do these pricing and packaging conversations and the implementation of it, how does it vary based on the size and scale or where your company is at in their life cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the things I think about when it comes to the spectrum of a startup to a enterprise firm is their level of care about periods in the future. So an enterprise is at a point where it can plan long term, where it can have a 5-year, a 10-year. I even worked for a company that had a 100-year plan, right? If you're a startup, you're worried about making payroll next week or next quarter, right? And so that changes your mindset on how you're pricing, because the ultimate guide of any effective price is it maximizes long-term profitability. The question though is put that long-term in any different context. Long-term for that startup might be, we got to make payroll and be around next quarter or next year. Enterprise is saying, hey, we're going to make these investments in order to, capture this market in 5 years, right? Those are two different definitions of long-term. I think the other thing that happens, right, is just in terms of the complexity and the evolution. So first of all, when you have a startup, there's no one except the founders to do the pricing, right? And you have one product or maybe a part of a product, you've got an MVP. Pricing at that point is not the most important thing. I recommend people charge something, right? Make sure that you can keep the lights on, that your unit economics make sense. But most of the VC world understands you're going to be unprofitable for a long period of time. As you grow, that changes to the point where if you're at an enterprise, you now are what you might call a rent seeker, where you're now trying to optimize every sort of dollar and cent, right? You're Apple and you're trying to eke out an extra 0.5% of margin for next year, right? To juice your earnings, right? Your exercise on a pricing strategy is going to be quite different than the startup that's just trying to, make sure that they don't go out of business. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. There's just where those companies are in the market position in the life cycle of their company. And then also, as you scale, you're going to have different things like, are we, single country based, multi-country based, right? As soon as you go international, there are complexities that happen there. You're going to have more people involved. Like I mentioned, if you're a startup, it's only the founders because there's no one else to do it. And then as you grow, generally I recommend product marketing own pricing in a technology company. But then at some point you may have a full-fledged price manager, director of pricing, or a pricing team. Although even that's fairly rare. I don't see that. I think the best data I saw was from OpenView. I think they said about 50% of companies at IPO stage, which I think they said about 100 million in revenue, had official pricing teams, right? So usually first pricing person around the 200 million revenue mark, right? So at each of those points, you've got multiple products, single product to multi-product, one or more people now involved in the process, potentially multiple countries involved in the process. So it changes the complexity on those dimensions.